Hi, good day. So for this topic, we'll be discussing the production cycle naman in relation to the operations of the company. So what are the learning objectives here? We have four. That's number one, to describe the major business activities and related information processing operations performed in the production cycle. Next is to identify major threats in the production cycle and evaluate the adequacy of various control procedures for dealing with those threats. Number three, explain how a company's cost accounting system can help it achieve its manufacturing goals. And lastly, discuss the key decisions that must be made in the production cycle and identify the information required to make those decisions. So ano ba yung i-discuss natin is actually the production cycle now. So how do we transform our set of raw materials into a goods that will be delivered or will be marketed to the general public for generation of profit. So ano-ano ba yung mga items or processes that we need to consider of in relation to this topic? So we have four items. Number one, product design, product planning and scheduling, production operations, which is the actual production now, and lastly, we have cost accounting. So what is product design ba? So we have bill of materials and operations list. So how do we create that specific product that will be sold to the market? So that's product design. Next, for the planning and scheduling naman, how do we in duration in the process of transforming our set of materials into a final finished goods, how do we plan or what are the usual processes related thereto? So ano ba yung mga sources natin or source documents? We have master production schedule, production order, and materials requisition. So ito na yung pagmamanage mo ng personnel sa production warehouse, including admin, if it is applicable, and at the same time, your utilization of raw materials for creation of your finished goods. Next is the actual production itself, which is the production operations. And lastly, the cost accounting, or how do we apply or allocate costs, or how do we subdivide the incurrence of actual cost or standard cost to each inventory items that we will be selling to the market. So before we proceed with the actual process in relation to production cycle, let's look into the general concepts in relation to production cycle itself. So how does production cycle works? So before the production cycle starts, we'll have first the processing or the customer inquiry or customer orders. So from the customer orders, we will now be having a production in relation to the orders requested by the clients, and afterwards we'll be manufacturing that and process from raw materials to finished goods. So along with the production, you also need labor, management of its production in the warehouse, and at the same time, management of the business in overall concept. So that includes the involvement of the management and the human resource. So ano ba yung involvement or what are their roles under production cycle? For human resource or the payroll cycle, they are the ones who are supplying manpower when it comes to the production or the what we call the labor force. May it be a direct cost or direct labor or overhead cost, which is admin, selling and admin, which is directly related to the production as well. And that includes supervision. Next is for the management naman under the production cycle, they wanted also to have the reports associated with the production cycle to see what are the level of production that we have on the comparative analysis, may it be a month to month, a week to week, or may it be an annual comparative of the production made, including the costs for decision-making purposes. Then, the purpose naman of our expenditure cycle is actually more of the procurement. So that includes procurement of goods, raw materials, supplies, or labor or overhead, as they say. Overhead may be an outside services that we need to have or we need to have under our production cycle apart from what the human resource is supplying. And lastly, we have general ledger and reporting system that includes the costing or the cost accounting and at the same time allocation of selling price and its selling to the market and of course movement of our finished goods inventory, raw materials, and all the aspects in relation to production cycle that relates to accounting. This will be recorded under our general ledger account. So what are the documents that is usually or that are usually needed when it comes to the production system? So be familiarized with this class kasi this is our actually documents that are needed under the production cycle. So unang-una dyan is the sale forecast. So we cannot really rely mostly on the actual because there are tendencies na baka magkaroon tayo ng stock out or excess inventory. So to mitigate those, we need to have a sales forecast for the next year's projected na magiging revenue natin. So like for example, you'll be having a forecast that next year you will be having an increase in sales based on historical records at around 25%. So that forecast determines what will be the level of production that will be doing under the production cycle so that they could expect a demand of your finished goods in the market. Next is the production schedule. This is the production plan and authorization to produce. So upon approval of the sales forecast, you will now be having a production schedule which details what would be the goods that will be produced in a specific span of time. So for example, you projected if you have a sales mix, meaning you have multiple products to be sold in the market, what would be the product that needed to be produced in a specific span of time so that will be reflected under your production schedule. Next is the bill of materials or the BOM. It specifies the types and quantities of the raw materials and sub-assemblies used to produce a single finished goods, specific finished good unit. So it details from the bill of materials, it details on a one product or one batch of product. Usually it's a batch basis, or if it is a small quantity, high value goods, a one item. On that specific batch on item, what would be the materials needed? That includes the supplies and at the same time the overhead costs associated with the production of that specific finished goods. So you will be detailing that using bill of materials. Next is the route sheet. So it details the production path a particular batch will take in the manufacturing process. So this is actually the step-by-step process on which the materials will be converted into finished goods. So that's the sequence of our operation. So from assembly down to polishing. Then next is the time allotted at each station. So you now be assessing on each station that the product will be going into or going through, what would be the estimated time it would take for it to finish that specific process. So for example, you have 5 processes or 5 stations on each station for assembly, finishing down to quality control, etc. What would be the estimated time? So it needs to be projected using the route sheet. Then next is the work order. It uses the BOM or the bill of materials and route the sheets to specify the exact materials and production process for each batch. So the bill of material is actually the projected materials needed for the specific production of the item. The work order naman, para ka lang na nag-order based on what you have on the listing. So from that listing, you will be proceeding that to the production specify that specific area, then it would be produced now and checking it if it has been provided already. Next, we have move ticket. It records the work done in each work center and authorizes the movement of the batch. It's more of the clearance, para siyang clearance. So what the clearance purpose is to check whether or not the specific process has been done, and at the same time, if it is approved for the next process. May iba kasi class na work in progress lang siya because you have overstock of the inventory. So they halt the operation to preserve the specific quality of the materials. Next is the material requisition. It authorizes the inventory warehouse to release raw materials for the use in the production cycle. So based on the bill of materials and the production batch and the sales forecast, you will now be using the materials requisition to pull out the specific quantity of raw materials needed for that specific production cycle. So this represents, or what you see actually in this presentation represents the different approach in relation to the manual presentation when it comes to production cycle. So it is actually detailed here kung ano yung mga items na kailangan natin consider of when it comes to production. So we have production planning and control and the work center. So from marketing, sales forecast, checking in the reports needed for the production or projection of the sales, may it be on a monthly or year annual basis. And that includes material requisition for the procurement of the raw materials needed for production, engineering that needed for the research and development or the actual production itself, and the checking of the inventory status for the production, the work orders, move tickets, and material requisition. For the work center is more of the checking of the production itself in general. So that includes the labor, the manual labor we have in relation to the production of your finished goods, the move tickets in relation to the stations related to work centers. That includes the production schedule, work order, and of course, checking in the inventory level in your warehouse. Next, we have storekeeping. So it entails the materials that has been stored and produced and stored in our warehouses, ready to be delivered or to be marketed in the customers. And lastly, we have inventory control. It entails the level of inventory, may it be a raw materials, a supply needed for your production, or the raw materials and other items needed for the creation of your finished goods. So you will be seeing now the reviewing of records, checking of material returns in cases it needed material returns for defect materials, updating the inventory record, and if we lack inventory, so we have stock outs, then it will be ordered via purchase requisition, and that includes the recording of actual finished goods and work in progress related to the products being produced in our accounting records, including na yung cost accounting natin. Yeah. So what are the items or what are the process that is common when it comes to production cycle? We have number one, product design and planning scheduling. So what are the usual threats here when it comes to these two items? We have number one, poor product design resulting in excess cost. So what are the controls to mitigate this kind of threat? We have number one, to analyze the cost arising from product design choices. So there's an actual and thorough research for the creation of a prototype, including the actual production itself. So it entails more of the quality and the production process in general. Next is analysis of warranty and repair costs. So the company must have its warranty in relation to defects or other goods that are not really on the best quality possible, and at the same time repair costs associated with the produced finished goods. And next is the over and under production. What are our controls or the common controls associated with mitigation of under and under production? We have number one, we need to have a production planning system on which we will see based on the forecast. So that's why it is vital to have a sales forecast beforehand, before the production cycle. Next is review and approval of production orders and schedule. It is also vital for you to check based on the sales forecast and the actual. So it's a combination now of, since it is now an ongoing production cycle, you need to review and approve, or you need to review thoroughly the production order associated with the client orders. And number three is to restrict access to orders and schedules. Now for production operations naman, what are the usual threats? So it is the actual production itself, or the it is the actual or the transformation now of our materials to finished goods. So what are the usual threats? Most common of which, since we usually use materials or inventory associated with the production, is inventory. So there is actually the most common one is the inventory theft. So how do we control this? We have number one, to restrict physical access. This is actually the same with the expenditure cycle and the revenue cycle. Next is to document movement of inventory as much as possible. You need to have a perpetual inventory system, or you need to have a barcode system or any system applicable for you to track maybe in a real time or on a slightly accurate inventory movement from the production warehouse to your accounting records. And next is segregation of custody from the authorization and recording. So you need to implement also segregation of duties associated with the production operation. So that includes a separation between custody, separation between authority of the approval of certain production items that need to be released, and at the same time recording of production cycle. That includes costing, and at the same time in and out of our inventory items to the warehouse and to the client. Next is fixed asset theft. So along with the inventory, there's actually items that are, or fixed asset or PPEs that are actually vital when it comes to our production. So there are actually other items that might be risk associated with theft. So what are your usual controls here, or the common controls that would mitigate fixed asset theft? So aside from the mentioned controls associated with the inventory, we need to have a detailed records of fixed asset, including disposals. So it is actually the same with controls associated with the movement of inventory. You need to have also a tracking system when it comes to fixed asset as well, including tracing for its procurement and disposal. Next is the poor performance of the production itself. So the quality or the poor performance. What are your usual controls? You need to check the performance reporting. So what are the usual consideration when it comes to performance reporting? So that includes quality report, quality testing. Number two is the production efficiency. You need to check whether or not there's efficiency in relation to the production from stage one to how many level of or stages will it take for you to produce a certain good. At the same time, supervision of the production itself. Next is suboptimal investment in fixed assets. So on your fixed asset, you cannot really fully maximize. You are not fully maximizing the potential of your fixed asset. So what are your controls here for you to limit or to mitigate that suboptimal investments? That's a solicit competitive bids. So you need to take consideration not just the price when you purchase a fixed asset or a PPE associated with your production, but of course the quality itself, because it could actually boost your production in quantity and at the same time lessen the cost because of lesser repairs and maintenance. And maybe if it is automated, it would lessen your labor cost. Next is loss of inventory or fixed asset due to fire. So this is a threat related to maybe a man-made or a natural cause. So what are your controls, or what are the usual controls here for the loss for this incident? So you could have an insurance and physical safeguards. You need to follow, of course, safety protocols implemented by the local government and at the same time by by the policy of the company associated with the safety and health protocols, and at the same time, assessment and monitoring of the safeguard of your production warehouse. And that includes availing for any insurance to cover for any man-made or for other fortuitous events that would arise that could actually harm your operation or ultimately could have destroyed or will be that would lead to destruction of your production warehouse. And lastly, we have disruption of operation. So maybe, of course, it's either a man-made or man-made or natural causes. So what are your controls here to mitigate? So you need to have a backup and disaster recovery plan. So aside from physical safeguard, insurances, and other considerations, you need to have a backup in case of other things. So it's more of a preventive, detective, and corrective controls, including recovery. So you need to be prepared on that. Next, for cost accounting naman, so basically cost accounting cuts, it entails for the allocation of the cost related to the production to each item and to each item to determine what are the value of your finished goods. And of course, that would update or that would determine the cost of production for each item. So what are the usual threats here when it comes to cost accounting? So number one, or the most common one here is inaccurate cost data. So you need to have an automation when it comes to cost accounting for you to have an accurate data kasi much accurate ang computer system to generate reports and to allocate immediately cost related to the production to each inventory items. Kasi it's much laborious when you use human calculation. Number two is inappropriate allocation of overhead costs. So what are the controls here to mitigate inappropriate allocation of overhead costs? It is a time-driven activity-based costing. So on your subject cost accounting, you will be discussing more of what are the usual or what are the accounting or the cost accounting procedures that is actually available and best suitable when it comes to other to the specific industry. So you have time-driven activity-based costing. So it is based on the activity itself or based on the actual production, as they say. But there are other costing methods that are actually appropriate when it comes to the production or costing. And that includes standard costing. And may iba, they are using actual costing. Actual costing is actually okay when you are, if the inventory item has a turnover of at least a turnover rate of 2 or less, considering that it's quite high, a less voluminous high value goods. And lastly, we have misleading reports. So associated with inaccurate cost data, inappropriate allocation of overhead, you could really expect if these threats might be in actual practice, that would lead to reports that are really not accurate, that could mislead the users of the financial information. So what are your controls here to mitigate this misleading report? You need to have a performance metrics in relation to production of your financial reports. So ano ba yung tinatawag natin na cost accounting system, or what does this cost accounting system mean? So we'll be giving you the glimpse or the general concept when it comes to cost accounting, but it is a separate subject on your higher accounting when you proceed to third year level. You will be discussing in details what is cost accounting. So to give you a glimpse of what cost accounting system is, It provides information for planning, controlling, and evaluating performance of production operations. And it provides accurate cost data about products for use in pricing and product mix decisions. And it collects and processes the information used to calculate the inventory and cost of goods sold values to appear in the organization's financials. So it's actually more of the cost, the allocation of the expenses incurred, may it be a budget or the standard cost item allocated to each good for you to see the cost that associated with each product for it to be produced. And you will be matching that to what would be your markup in the market. So that ends our discussion for chapter 14. So for next meeting, we'll be discussing now the other items related to the to accounting information system. So thank you so much, guys, and have a great day.